Well, welcome to New Covenant United Methodist Church in Farmington, New Mexico. My name is Tinker, and I'm glad you could join us. Well, I was originally thinking that we would be in person this weekend, so I'd prep my sermon for an in-person presentation. And unfortunately, the pandemic sets its own rules, and our numbers have spiked here, and we've had a lot of people within our congregation that have been exposed to people that we know have COVID or have been exposed to someone else that has COVID. So we made the decision that we're going to go ahead and close for this week and next, just to make sure we don't spread it within our congregation and just to be on the safe side. But it doesn't give me time to modify my sermon, so I'm going to go ahead and hold on to that sermon and save it for a later date. And instead I'm going to take a piece off of that sermon and just real quickly go over that. And that's kind of helpful actually in a way. It was the book of Ruth. So we're going through the Old Testament in chronological order, and the book of Ruth now fits in where we're at. But I'd already preached about the book of Ruth, so all I was going to do was a real quick recap. So that's what I'll do today, is a real quick recap of the book of Ruth. So if you remember the book of Ruth, it's about a woman named Naomi who's gone with her husband and 2 sons to Moab because there's a famine in Israel. And while she's there, her 2 sons marry 2 Moabite women. But then her husband and then her 2 sons both pass away. So it's just her with her 2 daughters-in-law in Moab. And she hears that there's now food again in Israel. And so she tells her 2 daughter-in-laws, stay here, remarry, you're both young, stay within your own people. And one says yes, but the other one says, no, I want to go with you. I want to go where you go, and I want to worship your God. And that's Ruth. So Ruth leaves with Naomi and goes to Israel with her. Of course, there's not a lot of options for a woman in Israel if they don't have a man with them in that time period. And so Naomi, at her age, is not sure what she's going to do. She's probably not a very good candidate for remarrying, but due to her age. And so Ruth begins to take care of her. This Moabite woman begins to take care of her, and she goes out into the fields and she's gleaning in the fields and bringing grain back and then working that grain into flour or whatever it needs to be worked into, and then making food for them or selling it. And so she is taking care of this woman she, other than being her mother-in-law, really doesn't owe a lot of allegiance to. Now this attracts the attention of a man named Boaz, who makes sure that Ruth gets all that she needs. And eventually what ends up happening is that this Moabite woman named Ruth marries Boaz. And then we find out that she is now an ancestor of the King of David. Now this book was actually written, though, there's two or three different scholarly versions of why this book was written. One was the fact that Moabites were forbidden to be in the assembly of God. They were forbidden to be a part of the people. Yet, way back, God had said, don't ever exclude foreigners, because remember, you once too were a foreigner in Egypt. And so there's this question when you get to King David, is why does he have a Moabite great-grandmother? And this is the explanation. She wasn't just any Moabite woman. She was a very godly woman. And so we're going to accept that. And then there are other schools of thought where perhaps instead of just saying, well, we're going to accept that, there are some that are arguing and saying, all along God said we are to include other people. And then the last one that I want to talk about, the last school of thought, was the fact that this book was actually written kind of as a slap in your face. During the rebuilding of the temple, after the diaspora, so that's after the Babylonians have come and destroyed the temple and scattered the Israelites, the Hebrews, around the Babylonian Empire, then the Persians take over. And during the time of the Persians, they're allowed to rebuild their temple. But the people, the Israelite people, have married other women. And as they return to worshiping God and as they're working on this temple, they have kind of revival. And during this revival, they want to do everything they can to be godly people. But there's a difference of opinions. And one of the opinions is that to truly be godly people, we have to put away these foreign women. But the other train of thought is no, we were to welcome the foreigner. We were to welcome the stranger. And as a case in point, they write down the story of Ruth, this Moabite woman who ends up becoming an ancestor of King David. So it was a way of saying, see, God brought forth King David out of a line that had a Moabite woman in it. So God didn't look at this situation and say, well, I can't do anything with these people. I can't do anything with King David. He's not holy enough because there's a Moabite ancestor. So that's the school of thought behind why the book of Ruth was ever written down, was to just kind of say, guys, look at the history alone and you can see that God does great things with all peoples. And that's why it was recorded. That's why this book was written down. But it fits right here where we've been talking lately, right inside the Judges. It was during the time of the Judges. And you're welcome to take any of those schools of thought as to why it was written down. Some people have wondered why it was written down, and there's not a whole lot of godly references in it. But this is probably why, to explain either why a Moabite woman was one of David's ancestors, showing that she was actually a godly woman, or as actually just kind of a slap in the face and saying, you know, why are you requiring that all the men put aside their foreign wives when the king that was the one that God said was after his own heart was a descendant of a Moabite woman, a foreign woman. So it's a reminder for us that God loves all people, uses all people, and probably doesn't worry so much about national identity like we do. Look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.